We panic today when our GPS loses signal for 30 seconds. Yet over 1,000 years ago, men were crossing the most violent ocean on Earth with nothing but the sky and a death wish. These sailors were venturing into a freezing, watery abyss, where a single mistake meant vanishing forever into the ice, with absolutely no hope of rescue or return. The Vikings didn't just stumble upon North America by accident. They targeted it with a terrifying level of precision, 500 years before Columbus even learned to tie his shoelaces. They navigated the Atlantic without a compass, without a sextant, and without a single scrap of paper telling them where to go. Let's rewind to the year 1000 AD, where you are stepping into the fur-lined boots of Leif Erikson, the son of the infamous Eric the Red. Your father was a man so violent he was exiled from 2 different countries for murder, eventually founding Greenland, a place so desolate that survival was a daily war against the elements. But growing up on a frozen rock wasn't enough for Leif. While others were content shivering in their longhouses, he was looking at the horizon with a hunger that couldn't be satisfied by ice and seal meat. He didn't want gold or glory. He wanted the one thing Greenland didn't have: timber, iron, and a future. But wanting to go is the easy part. Actually finding a continent that technically doesn't exist is a logistical nightmare. How do you set a course for the invisible? The answer lay in a rumor, a drunken story, and a merchant who got lost. The catalyst for this suicide mission wasn't a map, but a mistake made by a merchant named Bjarni Herjolfsson years earlier. He had been blown wildly off course during a storm and reported seeing a coastline of thick forests and low hills to the west, but in a move of supreme indifference, he refused to land and sailed back to Greenland. He told people, "Yeah, I saw some trees, weird," and went about his business, but for Leif, that throwaway comment was a revelation. In a land where wood was more precious than silver, the idea of a forest just sitting across the ocean was enough to risk everything. Leif didn't just borrow a boat. He bought Bjarni's ship, gathered 35 of the hardest men he could find, and sailed directly into the unknown. They loaded the ship with dried fish, skins, and weapons, fully aware that they were sailing off the edge of the known world, with no guarantee that Bjarni wasn't just hallucinating from dehydration. There was no backup plan, no coast guard, and no second chances. It was either find this forest land or die in the freezing Atlantic. It takes a special kind of insanity to sail into the void based on a rumor, but the Vikings were engineered differently. However, bravery doesn't navigate a ship through fog. To survive the open ocean without instruments, the Vikings had to utilize a set of skills that seem almost supernatural to modern minds. The Vikings were the human Swiss army knives of the medieval world, possessing a technological mastery of the seas that no other European culture could touch. Their longships were engineering marvels, designed with a shallow draft that allowed them to skim across the ocean surface like a water strider and penetrate deep upriver where no other warship could follow. These weren't clumsy cargo tubs. They were flexible, clinker-built predators that could twist with the waves rather than break against them. But a great ship is useless if you are going in circles, so they turned the entire natural world into their instrument panel. Their primary tool was the sky, using the sun by day and the North Star by night to maintain a steady latitude. But the North Atlantic is notorious for perpetual fog and overcast skies that can hide the heavens for weeks, blinding any sailor who relies solely on visual navigation. This is where the Vikings deployed a piece of magic that science has only recently confirmed: the sunstone. This was a crystal, likely Iceland spar, that could polarize light, allowing the navigator to locate the sun's position, even when it was completely obscured by thick clouds. It was essentially an X-ray machine for the weather, giving them a bearing when everyone else would be blind. But what happens when the sun goes down and the fog doesn't lift? That is when they stopped looking up and started looking down. The Vikings could read the ocean surface the way we read a street map, interpreting the color, temperature, and movement of the water to know what lay ahead. They could distinguish the specific rhythmic swell of the open ocean from the back bounce waves that reflect off a distant coastline long before the land itself was visible. They watched the color of the water shift from the deep, ink black of the abyss to the lighter, sediment-rich turquoise that signaled shallow banks or river runoffs. They studied the clouds, knowing that a stationary formation on the horizon often marked an island beneath it. And when the sea gave them no clues, they turned to biology, carrying cages of ravens on their ships specifically for navigation. If they released a bird and it circled the mast before returning, they knew they were stranded in the middle of nowhere, thousands of miles from safety. But if the bird shot off in a straight line and didn't come back, the crew would turn the rudder and follow it, trusting that the animal's instinct had found land. Nature was their GPS, and every wave, cloud, and bird was a data point in a mental map of the Atlantic. All this preparation and navigational sorcery finally paid off. After weeks at sea, the horizon broke, and Leif Erikson saw what no European had ever seen before. They didn't just hit land once, they found a series of distinct locations, treating the coastline like stepping stones toward a paradise. The first place they landed was a desolate landscape of flat stones and glaciers, which Leif named Helluland, likely modern-day Baffin Island in the Canadian Arctic. It was a harsh, unforgiving rock that offered nothing but ice and wind, so they didn't linger. They pushed south, hungry for the resources Bjarni had promised, until the landscape began to change. The next stop was Markland, or Forest Land, which corresponds to the coast of Labrador, where the trees stood tall and thick. For a crew coming from the treeless tundra of Greenland, seeing endless miles of timber was like stumbling into a vault of gold bars, proving that the risk of the voyage had already paid off. But Leif had a gut feeling that something even better lay further south. He pushed on, and finally they found it. A place where the rivers teemed with salmon larger than any they had ever seen, and wild grapes grew in abundance. They called it Vinland. Today, we know it as Newfoundland. This wasn't just a discovery, it was a jackpot. But unlike Columbus, who came to conquer, the Vikings had a different agenda. Most experts agree that the site they settled is L'Anse aux Meadows, located at the northern tip of Newfoundland. This wasn't just a temporary campsite. They built substantial turf longhouses, a forge for smelting iron from peat bogs, and a ship repair station to maintain their vessels for the return journey. They didn't just survive the winter, they thrived, stockpiling timber, furs, and grapes to take back to the starving colonies in Greenland. They explored efficiently and boldly, mapping the currents and resources without any desire to build a sprawling empire or convert the locals. However, the dream of a permanent North American Viking colony was doomed by logistics and violence. Although they established trade with the indigenous people whom they called Skraelings, relations quickly soured into bloody skirmishes that the small Viking band couldn't sustain. They were thousands of miles from home, outnumbered, and without any supply lines, so they made the pragmatic decision to pack up and leave. They didn't leave behind a kingdom, but they left behind a proof of concept that the ocean could be crossed. For centuries, this story was dismissed as a myth, a saga told around fires to make Vikings sound impressive. But in the 1960s, the Earth finally gave up the ghost. In 1960, a Norwegian explorer couple discovered the ruins at L'Anse aux Meadows, unearthing indisputable proof of Norse architecture in Canada. They found bronze fastening pins, iron rivets, and evidence of woodworking that matched the Viking style perfectly, silencing the skeptics who claimed the sagas were just fairy tales. But the smoking gun arrived recently in 2021 when scientists used a brilliant new method to date the wood found at the site. They looked for a cosmic fingerprint, a spike in carbon-14 caused by a massive solar storm that is known to have hit Earth in exactly 993 AD. By counting the tree rings from that solar storm layer to the bark edge where the tree was cut, they proved the Vikings felled those trees in exactly the year 1021 AD. This wasn't folklore or estimation. It was a precise, scientifically undeniable timestamp that confirmed Europeans were walking in the Americas exactly 471 years before Columbus sailed. The sagas were right all along. The Vikings had crossed the impossible ocean using nothing but wood, wind, and intuition. They didn't leave behind cathedrals or cities, but they left a legacy of pure, unadulterated grit. They proved that with the right mindset, the world is much smaller than it looks. Leif Erikson's journey is a reminder that the greatest tools for success aren't found in an app store. They are found in observation, preparation, and the willingness to go into the dark. They built wealth and power not by hoarding gold in a vault, but by moving valuable resources across vast distances, connecting worlds that didn't even know the other existed. They relied on trust, reputation, and shared risk to build a trade network that spanned from the ice sheets of the Arctic to the bazaars of Constantinople. The Vikings proved you can reshape the world with nothing but instinct and movement. But crossing the ocean was just the beginning of their genius. The way they structured their economy and built wealth from zero is even more mind-blowing. If you want to know how they turned survival skills into an empire of riches without banks or crypto, you need to see the financial side of their brutality. So just click this video right here. 7 Viking tricks to get rich from zero. It turns out their best hacks are still smarter than most modern gurus.